I'm enjoying your conference. I was here last night, and particularly this morning's both the worship service and the keynote speakers sort of changed up my idea of what I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon. Expanding our ministries, building our future, growing the multicultural, multi-generational congregation. We certainly like multi-syllabic conference titles. But I embrace that. I think what you're doing here is extraordinary. You've had a long history of moving pushing the envelope on multiracial, multicultural work. And I like to think that the district south of you, the Southeast District, the district formerly known as the Thomas Jefferson District, has learned from you. Reverend Hardy's acknowledged this morning your lead in this district's work. And I think I would confirm, at least my assessment, that you're leading the association in what you're doing. But I'm going to take a little personal privilege and suggest that the district south of you maybe comes in second. But I would also like to tell you that we've learned from you. When I first went on the then Thomas Jefferson District Board as the incoming vice president, our retreat weekend was facilitated by Paula Cole Jones. And is she in the room? Yes, there she is. And we had a history of doing anti-racism work that frankly wasn't working all that well. It was just sort of stuck. And I would like to suggest that what came out of that retreat was a re-energized board that sort of got it and began to change all number of things. And we decided to revive the problem of our name in terms of it wasn't terribly welcoming. And it wasn't a terribly popular subject to resurrect either. But resurrect it we did. And it was a very informative process. It was a 2-year process. Meetings as large as this, rather emotional and heavily charged. Remember, a name change takes about 2/3 of a vote in our bylaws, and we got close the first time. But the second year, we provided more information, more communication with our congregations, and we sponsored a People of Color, we the district, sponsored a People of Color gathering. And that invited people of color to sort of re-engage with their congregations that they felt a little removed from, particularly the district. And anyway, they came back as delegates and others the second year, and the vote was overwhelmingly positive. And I believe it was because the process allowed people to tell their stories. And those stories were heard. And people who were opposed to it 1 year had their minds changed the second year. So I think hearts were touched, minds were changed, and changed the name we did. Susan Newman this morning, she had some terrific metaphors, don't you think? I couldn't write them all down, but the one that I responded to was setting the welcoming table and knowing who you're trying to invite. But her story resonated with us because I think part of our challenge as an association, particularly as we look to the future, is how we're going to grow our communities, congregations and communities, and reach out to folks. Last night, your theme was how our stories make us or limit us. Melody's emotional story of her high school days in North Carolina resonated very deeply with me. I grew up in the Jim Crow South, spent some time in North Carolina with my grandparents, and I had this naive thought as a high school junior. Remember, this was the time that Virginia was doing its massive resistance laws to avoid integrating its schools. I had this great idea that I would make a presentation to the superintendent of schools on how we could begin the process of integration. He, of course, threw me out of his office, but I was cheeky enough and naive enough to think that I could be persuasive with him in those days. It reminds us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. You just have to keep telling the stories. But how our stories make us, that theme last night, moved me to tell you my story. I had something else to say until